You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. But before we get started, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. On today's episode of the podcast, we'll be talking about cricket in America for this cricket discussion and trying to answer the question, will cricket take off in the USA? Well, to help me try and answer that question, and joining me on today's cricket discussion is Nate Hayes from Emerging Cricket. Nate, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much. It's great to be on. We had a chat already about the things that we're passionate about cricket. So I'm looking forward to getting into the meat and potatoes of this.
Absolutely. But before we do that, Nate, before we try and answer that question, will cricket take off or kick off in America? Let's get to know about you a little bit. Your cricketing journey. Trying to get into cricket, discovering cricket. So as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed, Nate, on the podcast, I like to take them back when they first got into cricket. And it's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they got started in cricket. So Nate, how did you get into cricket, first of all?
Sure. Well, 2015, I work in IT. And of course, that means I work with a lot of folks from South Asia, a lot of expats from Pakistan, and from India especially. And so 2015 World Cup came around. Some of my coworkers were talking about fantasy sports. I thought they were talking about fantasy football, which is huge here. And I was thinking, well, it's too early for fantasy football because it wasn't football season. So I was like curious, and what are you talking about? Oh, we're talking about cricket. We got the World Cup is happening. And so I'm like, oh, well, I may as well learn about this. So I have something to talk about when we all have tea and coffee. So, I went back and forth with them. They did not do a good job explaining it to me, but they were very passionate about it, and that's the passion that they had for it was appealing to me. And so I tried to learn about it myself. Before I even watched any cricket, I was up late at night watching the ball by ball commentary, literally just watching and reading the commentary, trying to figure out what was going on, piecing that together with the knowledge that I had and with whatever I could Google. And so it started to make sense to me. I saw a lot of really interesting potential for creativity in the sport and for strategy that I appreciated. And so then I finally saw my first like real relevant cricket. Obviously, by this point, I had Googled and I had watched some things. But the first contemporary cricket that I saw that was relevant to the moment was, and actually at the time in 2015, it was hard to find anything cricket online, any videos. It was harder than it should be. Basically, it was limited to like highlight reels of great fielding plays, which is really what hooked me at first was. But what seriously hooked me and made me realize, okay, I love this sport was the Shane Watson versus Wahab Riaz spell in 2015. Yeah. When I saw that, and I've talked about this a couple times this week already with people, but when I saw how fiery and aggressive Wahab Riaz was, and after he would finish his run up, he would be right there in Watson's face, clapping his hands, in his face and looking at him and staring him down. And the intimidation there, and as a baseball fan, as someone who played college baseball, I can appreciate that the bat and ball matchup and the intimidation that a really violent pitcher can slash bowler can bring. And I really appreciated Watson's courage in the moment. And so this combination of what he was up against and what Wahab Riaz was bringing to him, that just really fired me up. And I said, okay, I've got to try this sport. I have to watch this sport. I got to find some way to really get into this sport. So that's how I got into it. And then it was just I had this idea in my head that like, wow, how could cricket translate to American fans? How could because what really inspired me was that the fact that there were three formats, three major formats: T20, ODI, and then Test. And looking at these three formats, I was like, which of these things would appeal to an American, and which of these things would be weird to an American to an off-putting degree. And then I was thinking, of course, I'm starting to think about kids. You want to get kids into playing the game, and how are kids going to how is the average American kid who's never touched cricket in their life, how are you going to appeal to them when maybe they bat number 6 in a T20, and maybe your opening pair goes the whole game and bats and doesn't get out, and like American parents are not going to keep bringing your kid out in those situations. What if your kid doesn't bowl? You're standing in the field and you get 3 balls hit to you the whole time. I was just thinking, yeah, that's the obstacle that cricket has to new people, with youth, because obviously you want to get youth playing. So I started to think of new formats. It was kind of cool because I looked at cricket like it was the perfect backyard sport because of how scalable it was, and how there's multi-inning games and there's single inning games, comparing it and contrasting it to baseball. And I had all these I thought they were great ideas, right? I'm just like writing out all these different formats for cricket, and myself, and I'm studying the 3 formats, and I'm seeing, how could you make a format for kids to play that would really hook them in. That was my initial, because I was coaching soccer at the time, youth soccer, and that was my initial motivation. But then I started to play it, and then I got the video games, the Don Bradman cricket, and then the cricket 19, and obviously 2020 comes around, and everyone has time. I'm not playing cricket now because our cricket season's canceled. I'm not playing ice hockey, which is something I also enjoy doing, because obviously nobody's doing anything. So I needed to spend some time on something, and because I was losing my mind. And so I just had this idea. I was like, well, Peter Della Penna, the writer for ESPN Cricket Info, I liked this idea he had for a national championship. Now, if you're a fan of American cricket, by this point in time, I was a fan of American cricket pretty big in 2020. And there's a lot in between 2015 and 2020. I'm just jumping right now. But when you're a fan of USA Cricket, you get used to things not making sense. You get used to them not doing the obvious things that make sense to, you're like, this national, what are they doing? And so Peter had this idea for a national championship, which was basically he called it the red, white, and blue series, where you get the best enough players to fill 3 teams, and you have them play down in Florida or wherever. And in my version was have them play here in Morrisville, North Carolina at Church Street Park. But so basically I just said, okay, you know what? I like this idea, and I understand that one thing I understand, because I was an art major in college, I have an art degree, is when you draw something out for someone, or when you make something that illustrates your idea, it does a better job than just saying it or than them reading the words. And so I said, you know what, I'll take this cricket 19. I can create my own players there. I'll create the best, 42 or so cricketers in the USA, and I'll put them on these 3 teams. I'll make 3 teams for these players. And so I started doing a lot of research about, okay, I already knew about probably 25 to 30 of the best cricketers in the country. And so I started talking to some of those guys and asking them, who, looking at articles where players were invited to combines or to trials and things like that. And I started looking at all these different cricketers and learning about them, and literally having phone conversations about cricketers that, like, in Chicago or something. And so I started like making these players on the video game, and it was long and slow. And then I just basically did a series called the Red, White, and Blue series, and I hired Aman Patel, which was my friend. So when I first got into to cricket, I joined a team, and my first practice I came out. My friend Snail's son, Aman, was there, and he was, I think, 12 at the time. And him and I, we threw an American football around for most of the practice. And I was talking to him about his favorite football team and stuff like that. And so anyways, this kid, this youngster, by this point in 2020, he was 5 years old. He was 17 years old. And so I was like, hey, I noticed that he had his own podcast that he had just started where he's talking about sports. And I knew he was really into that. And that's what he wanted to do for his career. So I said, hey, look, if I record these games and then cut them down into highlights for my series, can you and make like little 7-minute videos or whatever about the games in this imaginary series that I'm making? Can I pay you to do the commentary for the highlight reel? And he was like, okay, cool. So here I am, 39 years old, sending these videos to a 17-year-old kid who both of us are looking for something to do. And he does the commentary on these videos, and we made a whole series about it. And, it turned, it was cool. It was fun. But one of the great things about it was how much the domestic cricketers in the USA liked it. They liked it and they shared it, and it got me in touch with a lot of cricketers. So then Emerging Cricket stumbles across it, and they message me and they're like, look, we're looking for a American correspondent, somebody who knows the domestic cricket scene in the USA. And I clearly by this point I'm on the short list. So I was like, they were like, would you like to contribute with us? And I thought I would be editing videos at first or making a lot of graphics, which is what I kind of have more experience doing, making graphic arts and things like that. And so I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. And then I had to really think about it when I decided to write an article one day because I saw something that was interesting. At the time, there were all these rumors about Major League coming around and what Major League was up to. And, so I wrote an article about a player that I had found an interview on. Somebody, a cricketer from Nigeria, emails or messages me on Instagram, sending me this conversation between a player and his agent. And the player's saying, yeah, Major League Cricket's hiring me to move to the USA. And so at this point in time, there were rumors this was happening, but we didn't have any confirmed names, or a couple. So I basically wrote an article right then about this conversation, published it. It did really, really well. I mean, it was a long time before I wrote another article that did as well as the very first one I wrote for Emerging Cricket. And I noticed right away that people are really interested in the developments of ACE, American Cricket Enterprises, of Major League Cricket and minor league cricket, and all these things were about to emerge. And I had time on my hands, so that's how I got into Emerging Cricket. And I'll tell you what, the group of guys at Emerging Cricket are phenomenal. They're just everything we do is volunteer. So we don't get paid for it, but we do it out of passion. And every one of these guys that's a vital part of Emerging Cricket works very hard, and they already have their own careers and their own jobs, and they try to be involved in cricket as much as they can. And some of them are involved. Tim Cutler is the CEO for Vanuatu Cricket. He was one of the founders. He used to be the CEO for Hong Kong. Daniel Beswick, he does a lot of stuff for, I think, Fox in Australia, and he works a lot with the ICC, and all these guys. Nick, he's a busy guy. He's actually moved to Iceland, where his wife is studying in college, and so, or she's studying a grad degree there. So there are all these great things that these guys do. Rod Lyle, who actually, I think he started the European Cricket website, and he writes about the Netherlands, and he's probably the top guy. Well, him and Bertus are the top guys that write about Netherlands cricket. So meeting these guys, I was in awe of them. The funny thing is, I had already subscribed. I was already a Patreon to Emerging Cricket. I was loyally listening to their podcast. It was my favorite podcast. I would listen to it, every episode I listened to, and I loved when they had guests on that were like, for example, like the CEO of like Germany, or like Spain. All these, learning about how these nations grew the game was what I was most interested in, because I wanted cricket to work here. And so I started writing about it. I started, asking questions to our own national governing body and to our own cricketers, and writing articles that I thought were significant and important, and trying to hold somebody's feet to the fire here. And that's not an easy thing to do, because they can easily just not reply to you, which I've learned. But yes, so that's how I got into cricket. Writing about it was like the first thing I did really that I think was semi-significant with emerging cricket. But then ever since then I've moved. I still write for them when I can, but it's hard for me. I don't know how guys like Jared Kimber or I don't know how these guys do video content in pods, and then also they'll write articles and they just switch boom boom boom. For me, I have
and get into the game as well, traveling.
Yeah, and I've got to be in a different headspace for every one of those things. It's hard for me to switch gears from one thing to the next, but I'm doing my best. And now I have my own thing called Big Innings that I do with Amin Patel, the youngster, who's now at UNC, and with Bobber Beg, who's our producer, and with Dane Pete, who is former South Africa test spinner who plays in Major League Cricket. And so we have that going on. We call it the America's Cricket Show. We did a live show all through Major League Cricket, and we haven't done an episode in about a week. I'm actually working on editing an interview I did with Atif Nawaz, talking about the 100 and MLC and all these great things. But yeah, that's how I got into it. And obviously I'm pretty deep into it. And it takes up all my spare time.
It does with everyone, mate.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. Once you get the cricket bug, you can't stop. You want more.
No,
that's what cricket does. And sport does in general.
And I think cricket especially does that because it's not yet lived up to its promise. I think in some places in the world it certainly has, but overall we see the potential for this wonderful game of cricket. And I think if you love the sport, you want to immerse yourself in it and try to influence and impact that in any way that you can at all, and try to move the needle, because we know that yes, everyone, if somebody tells you that cricket's the second most popular sport in the world, they're selling you something. It's yes, by numbers it is, but let's talk about the health of cricket in general. There are so many problems with cricket that you and I and people who love the game, we want to see cricket overcome these problems. We want to see it move beyond the protectionism that has limited it for over 100 years. And we have millions of examples of this. We have so many examples of this, especially in the USA. If you know about American cricket, if you know about the history of cricket in the USA, you can really have an appreciation for anti-protectionism. That's always what cricket's been. It's always been protect this class, and that can't be that way. It needs to be more democratic. It needs to be more for everybody. And so I think, anybody who loves the game agrees with that, I believe, unless you have some incentive to not agree with that.
But cricket's one of those oldest sports steeped in tradition, history, and it's very hard to try and move away from that. People don't like change. People want things to stay as the status quo,
right? But some people also like right and wrong. It's like sometimes this is not just a cricket issue, but sometimes people like things to stay the same, but let's do it the right way. Let's make sure that it's done right, and that that's the big thing to me is there's a right way to do this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of sports that do certain things better than cricket does, and we can look at those and we can learn from them. And I feel the same way about everything in my life as I do about cricket. It's like there's always somebody out there doing the thing that you're trying to do or that you should be doing better than you are. And you recognize those people and those entities, and you try to emulate them wherever possible, and find out what makes those things work, and try to implement those problems, which honestly, by and large, our society is very bad at that because everything in society is protectionism. Everything is. The status quo is not going to go away on its own, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing. Do you think cricket is doing enough to promote associate nations within
No,
the ICC?
no, no, not at all. Part of that is budget. Part of it is okay. Look, I understand the argument that there's an argument to be made that if you give certain boards money, you're just throwing it down a hole. I agree. I agree with that. That's true. So I think you kind of solve that with incentives. You have to understand what success looks like. What does success look like to the ICC? That's what they have to determine first of all. What do you count as a successful thing? And also, Major League Cricket was very successful here. You watch a Major League Cricket game, the broadcast is fantastic. You watch a USA game at 4 a.m. on the other side of the earth because you're passionate about it. You watch that and you're lucky to get through the game with the stream intact, and let alone be able to tell what you're looking at. You know, you should be able to look at the batters on the screen and tell which one's which. You know, the broadcast quality is poor, and part of that's because of the limitations of the infrastructure wherever they're playing. You know, if you're playing in Papua New Guinea, you're probably not going to have a great stream. But whenever and wherever possible, if you really want to spread the international game in the USA, the broadcast has to be good because there are so many options for us Americans as far as sports goes, and the broadcast quality is fantastic in every one of them. So you don't want to look like an amateur operation. Also, a nation like USA Cricket is not going to be able to get the sponsors that they need to have to sustain themselves in a very expensive environment without a good broadcast. You're just not going to. You're not going to appeal to Under Armour or Nike or anybody like that by showing them a USA broadcast. That's so ICC needs to spend more money on broadcast. To me, that's first and foremost. Is they need to spend more money on the broadcast, make sure it's quality, make sure they represent. That was to me one of the most tragic things when we secured ODI status was watching the very next game that we played and seeing that it was the same quality as before we before we achieved ODI status. And so to me that's the biggest thing. And also is T20 your flagship product as far as spreading the game? Is it the ICC? Because the ICC says that it is. The T20 is that. However, why don't we have a Cricket World Cup League 2 for T20? Why do we only have one for ODI? You know, associate ODI is miles better than full member ODI, if you ask me, in terms of the game quality. You know, you're not going to see a 450 run innings, you know, and then you win by 125 runs. You're not going to see that in associate cricket. You're going to see dogfights, and you're going to see 10 wickets in an innings. You know, it's like USA just did 36 of these things, and I think they averaged something like 7 wickets in innings in their batting innings. That doesn't happen in full member cricket. So to me, ODI cricket in the associate realm is closer to what it was intended to be in the first place, which is just a one day version of a test. And so, but not enough people watch it. T20 is your product that's going to reach into new markets and new demographics. And if you don't have a league, like USA has played literally 2 T20s that weren't qualifiers since 2018. 2. And that's, how are we supposed to spread cricket here if we're not playing T20 internationals? And so, yes, everyone talks about, are these bilaterals useless in full member? In full member cricket, that's a big talking point. Are bilaterals even important? Well, now there's no leagues. You know what I mean? Like, so, but like I think they would be important to associates if they encouraged just more T20 cricket in general. But having a league, having a Cricket World Cup League 2 T20 version would be more beneficial than the ODI version, if you ask me. And that's what I think they should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the MCC, the Maribyrnong Cricket Club, recently said that ODIs will be not assistant in 2027, which is not far away, actually.
Not
And
far away.
ODI cricket is in the talking point about its future, because you have T20 cricket, then you have Test cricket.
Yeah.
So one format probably will have to give, and it's probably one-day cricket as we speak. But that's also denying the associate countries who are members of the ICC an opportunity to play cricket. Because you know, if you have ODIs and T20s, they can play more cricket, they can get better, they can develop, they can travel the world.
Sure.
But if that's taken away, then they've only got T20 cricket left, which is probably not enough in their minds.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think because you have, I mean, look at Spain. Spain's goal right now is to make it to a one day nation. You know, I mean, they got a long way to go, but they need to get into the Challenge League was what their goal is. And you know, they say that's their goal, and they actually like research how to manipulate the standings. The best way to manipulate the standings, this is how they plan their schedule, is the entirety of their schedule planning is how to manipulate the ICC rankings so that they can get up into the Challenge League, and so that they can start playing 50 overs cricket. And then their next goal will be obviously to make it to as a one-day cricketing nation. So you have these carrots for these associate nations that have been around for a while that you're trying to tell them are important things, and then you're undermining that on the other hand by by saying, hey, we're not going to have, this isn't even going to be a thing in full member, in 4 years or whatever. So that's tricky. I think that this is just typical cricket identity crisis, where cricket doesn't know what it is. It's one of the coolest things about cricket is also its biggest burden, and that is there's a lot of formats. I think personally, I don't have a problem with saying like, okay, cricket exists in England this way, cricket exists in Australia this way. It doesn't have to exist everywhere the same way. Like there's cup match in Bermuda that everyone loves. And everyone goes to cup match, and I think it's a 2 or 3 day game, and that's that. But everyone loves it there. So let them have that. We need to get the Audi Cup going again. We need to have the rivalry of USA versus Canada renewed and consistent. We have fan bases here. If you played the Audi Cup here in Morrisville, North Carolina, you get 2,000 fans to every game every single time. If you did it in Brampton, in Canada, you'd get 2,000 fans. So, or maybe not 2,000, but you get a good amount of fans. And so why aren't we doing that? Like that, we can do enough things without waiting for the ICC, to get their stuff together, because the ICC has a tough task at hand. They're trying to design something that's at the lowest common denominator, and we have our own essential needs. And so does every other national governing body. And so it's ultimately up to the national governing bodies to sort out what works for them. And if that means that we're just a T20 playing nation in the USA, which honestly, we play more T20 cricket here than anybody else in the world, as far as, our domestic game is T20. So if that's that, then so be it. It's just, I think we need to look at kind of a bespoke solution to this to some degree, and that's what the full members are already doing.
Yeah, that's right. It seems that we're not working together as a cricketing community.
No, we're not.
It seems that everyone cares about their own self-interests, like money, profits, and that's the thing. When money's involved in sport, people care about that, and greed comes into it, and you don't think about others.
Yeah,
it's like the 50 over World Cup. They cut that down to 10 teams, but they're going to extend it back out to 14 for the next World Cup in 2027.
And then 20 from there on. Yeah.
Yes. Which is good.
Great.
Because
if they stick to it.
Yeah. But are they going to go through with it? You see, things could change, you never know.
Well, I think what we need a compromise. We need to put India in the final automatically, and then have 19 other teams play against India in the final. I'm just kidding. But that's, That's the thing. And you know, the proof is in the pudding. What you just said. Everyone's looking out for their own
Yeah.
good. It's their kind of their responsibility to do that. It's kind of what happens in a capitalistic you know, environment. And the proof is in the pudding in that in the BCCI feel that they're justified to having 38.5% of the pie. And leaving the rest for a whole lot of other nations to split up, for over 100 nations to split up. And
Mm.
it's meanwhile, you look at the distribution model of the revenue in the IPL, it's very equitable. And that goes to show you that the IPL understands that the IPL, it's their product.
Yeah.
And they know that in order to sustain it and for it to be healthy, it has to be equitable. It has to be, you're only as strong as your weakest link. They know that. But
Yeah.
on the international side of things, they don't care about how weak the weakest link is, because they only really care about themselves. And this is everybody.
Yes. Yeah, that's entirely true. It's sort of when, you know, in terms of associate nations, well, Ireland's not an associate nation; they're a full member. But when they played the Test match against England recently at Lords,
Yeah,
they cared about more of the World Cup qualifiers that they had upcoming than the actual Test match itself.
sure.
Their priorities were slightly changed there, and that was
Yeah,
talked about. But I
yeah,
guess that's how Ireland get more opportunities, and
yeah,
associate nations do, even though they
exactly.
are a full member,
Yeah,
because they do play Test cricket. So
no, 100%. That's 100% true. It's you know, it's survivalism for them. You know,
mm,
that's the thing. And yes, they're a test playing nation, but they're not a world test uh, cricket championship nation. And I hope that for their sake, the ICC, whenever they decide to impose this four four full member overseas cap in T20 franchise cricket, which has been talked about in terms of capping the playing 11s in T20 franchise cricket to 4 full member overseas. I hope that the ICC says, wait a second, we're going to have to not call it. We're not, if they cap it to just full members, you'll never see an Irish player play in a T20 league.
mm,
You know, you'll never see that happen. So if they just say, okay, we're going to cap it to 4 World Test Cricket Championship teams, because I think that's a better definition of a certain class of cricket, is whether or not you're part of the World Test Cricket Championship, not necessarily whether you're a full member. But you know,
yes, well, Ireland and Zimbabwe and Afghanistan don't play in the WTC.
exactly, right,
It's only 9 teams.
right.
So
And so if they're lumped in as full members, where you're limiting uh the full member overseas to 4
mm,
outside of Rashid Khan, how many of those other guys are going to get a chance to play in a T20 franchise league if you're capping the full members?
yes,
It's going to be only be the World Test Championship game teams, sorry, players that are going to be in there. And so if you allow, if they're going to do this, they have to allow a couple of associates / non World Test Cricket Championship players to join the teams too as overseas. You have to make room for that to bridge the gaps. Otherwise, the league in UAE is going to sink, because they don't have the domestic talent to fill in the gaps. You
yeah.
know, yeah. So, you know, that could actually be a good thing for these associates, and then the I guess non World Test Championship full members.
Yeah, that's right. I think in the IPL, the last auction, we saw some associate member players in the auction, and some were considered and others weren't. But at least that's a good step in the right direction, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We know Sandeep Lamachani has been involved in a lot of these leagues, Nepal spinner, but there's a lot of great cricketers in associate cricket. Like, I think that if, you know, the GT20 is not the greatest cricket competition in the world, for as far as T20 goes, but Canada's GT20, one thing it does really well is it showcases a lot of associate cricket. They of course they got the Chris Lynns in there. They've got the Chris Gales, but you know they've also got, you know,
Even Steve Smith played.
Yeah, true.
When you
True.
can.
When he was
Yeah.
suspended. Yeah. Yeah. I know people that were like went to watch that just because of that.
Mm.
But yes, so they've got those players, but they also have, some of these great associate players like JJ Smith and players like that. Like they had in the past had a lot of good Americans. They had Kyle Phillip, they had Hayden Walsh Jr. when he was an American, and obviously Ali Khan, and that's where these guys got their springboard into the CPL. So those leagues are important, and they might even be more important if this limit's imposed, but they allow for associates to be overseas too.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, other T20 leagues like the Big Bash here in Australia and other
Yeah.
leagues in the world could take a leaf out of the IPL's book when it comes to associate players, because there is talent there.
Yeah,
They can
yeah,
be useful for your team.
yeah. I anticipate, and I'm sure we'll talk about Major League Cricket here, but I anticipate a couple of Major League cricketers making it into these bigger leagues because a couple of domestic Americans making it into these bigger leagues because of how well they did in Major League Cricket.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Do you have any favorite games that you've watched, Nate, in your cricketing journey thus far that you've seen? Favorite players or anything?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I have kind of favorite players from each nation. It's kind of how I think about it. So my favorite English player, it's funny because my two favorite English players were always Moeen Ali and Liam Plunkett. And then I actually get to meet Liam Plunkett when he comes here because he moved here. And I've had so many conversations with Liam Plunkett. He's a great guy. And it's kind of funny. I'm like, that's really weird because I loved watching the way that he played cricket. I loved it. But Moeen Ali was probably my first favorite cricketer. I just liked the fact that, well, first of all, he stands out. He's got this beard. He's got this long beard. He's on England's team, and he's the only guy with this gigantic beard. And so I was like, that's my favorite guy right there. It's funny because I picked my favorite hockey player when I was a kid because he didn't wear a helmet and he had a big mustache. And I was like, yeah, my favorite guy right there. So, but yeah, like Moeen Ali was immediately my favorite. I had seen him. I just saw him perform real well the first time I watched England. But yeah, I have the series with the Misbah ul Haq, the push-up series, the Pakistan one. That's one of my favorites cricket moments. The best game I ever saw, two of them, USA versus Canada here at Morrisville, here at Church Street Park, in 2018, and we had literally 2,000 fans to watch USA versus Canada. The very first game was a super over that Canada won. They hit a 6 on the final ball to get into the super over. And then I think that's how it went. Yeah. And then the second game, USA needed 22 to win in the final over, and Stephen Taylor chased it down with a ball to spare. And that both of those were just unbelievable. Like the atmosphere was incredible. Fans stormed the field, and everybody wanted a selfie with Stephen Taylor. And at the time, that was the first time that fans had really paid attention to USA cricket games, and so the players, it was very emotional for them because they are toiling in associate cricket. Nobody cares to come to watch them play, really, no more than like 30 people or so. And then here we do. We our cricket community here is amazing, and we put on this incredible America's qualifier. Instantly got Morrisville and Church Street Park's name out there, and it's been terrific ever since, as far as the reputation. Obviously it's been rocky roads, and USA hasn't played any games here since 2018. And one of the reasons they won't play games here is because they don't want to pay to manage the crowds. Like this is the only place they're going to get fans, and they don't want to pay to deal with that. So that's a problem. Obviously, if your national governing body is going to be that, it's very cynical seeming, right? It's just effectively a cynical thing to do. But so that's an uphill battle. But Major League Cricket and minor league cricket have utilized this wonderful ground really, really well. So that's at least they've filled that void. And I do commentary for the Morrisville minor league team, which I really love. I feel really honored to be able to do that. But yeah. So yeah, I guess back to your question, I've like veered way off.
Yeah.
I think I really love Wahab Riaz is my favorite Pakistani player. And Jadeja is my favorite Indian cricketer. South African is probably Rabada. And then let's see.
Anyone from Australia?
Australia? Oh yeah. I really like Stoinis a lot, and I like Cummins a lot. But my favorite is definitely Watson all time. For obvious reasons. But yeah, I like a lot of these guys. I like Steve Smith a lot too. I really like Steve Smith. I love anybody who does something kind of new and finds a new way to do things, and it makes sense. Like the way that Steve Smith bats, his approach to batting is so good. It just makes so much sense why he bats the way that he does.
Yeah.
And it's revolutionary in a way. And then let's see who else. Oh, my favorite Canadian is Hamza Tarek. My favorite West Indian is Hayden Walsh Jr. He played for USA, so of course he's going to be my favorite West Indian, and he's a great guy. He's a really cool guy. And New Zealand, shoot, man. I don't know. I really like Guptill because I like his fielding. I like fielders, but no, I like Phillips.
Yeah, Glenn Phillips.
I like Glenn Phillips. I like Glenn Phillips a lot. I actually got to I had a really brief chat with him in MLC, just briefly. He probably doesn't even remember it. It was just, but like he made 2 over-the-shoulder catches in the same game from the circle, running running outside of the circle, over his shoulder like this. And he catches him like this, running this way.
Yeah.
And he slides when he catches it, and both times. And those are hard catches to make in any sport. And he made them at Church Street. And Church Street is crowned at about 1 degree or so, or 1%. It's crowned at like 1%, which means that if you're that you can't see the feet of the if I'm at deep square and you're at deep point, we can't see each other's feet because of the crown of it. So he's running basically down a hill when he makes these catches, and it's a hard thing to do there. And he said after the game he had never made one of those in a game, but he practices them all the time. And those were his first 2, and they were in the same game. So he's probably my favorite New Zealand cricketer right now. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear. Those are often the hardest catches to do, especially when you're running away from the ball and looking over your shoulder, trying to judge where it's going to land in front of you. Those are often the hardest ones.
You just have to have the attitude. I always liked growing up playing baseball, and now, and obviously playing cricket later, but growing up with baseball and playing it in college, I always loved those types of plays because no one expects you to make it.
Yeah.
There's no pressure at all. It's all fun. It's 100% fun. It's let me see if I can do this, and I'm going to catch this ball, and you have to be determined. I'm going to do this right now, and if you make the catch, everyone goes nuts, and it's the greatest feeling. So that's why I like this guy a lot. And plus, he's fast. He is so fast on the ground.
Yeah, he's lightning quick, and he's a keeper as well.
I know. When he's a keeper, though, I'm like, crap, he's keeping. Because now I don't get to see him patrolling the boundary.
Yes, but he's lightning. He's pretty quick in the outfield.
He's so fast. He's fast.
He's very quick. How can people get involved with emerging cricket, Nate? Because it's a lot of people, as you mentioned before, can contribute. So
yes,
if people want to contribute to emerging cricket, how can they do that?
Well, you got to reach out to emerging cricket, have some ideas, because obviously, look, this is cricket, right? And we focus on associate cricket is what we focus on. And so if you want to write about India, we're not the place for you. If you want to write about, Pakistan or Australia, we're not the place for you. But So you have to have the right attitude. You have to have, we're a little bit idealistic. You know what I mean? It's just the way that it is. And so we believe cricket should be somewhere. We believe the game should grow. So if you don't have that attitude, you shouldn't write with us. You shouldn't contribute with us. So that's for starters. So you have to decide that it's a good fit for you. If it is, email Emerging Cricket. Email us. I don't remember what the email address is, but it's I can't remember. But you can email me, cricknate@gmail.com, and we'll talk it over. If we do have people who come in and out who sometimes contribute and sometimes don't, and or just contribute a little while and then move on to something else. But we appreciate all of that stuff. And but yeah, that's the biggest thing. You got to make sure it's a fit first. That you kind of like go with the program a little bit,
Yeah. That's understandable. So yeah, we'll leave a link to that in the description of this episode for everyone to check it out. Emerging Cricket. Now that's the talking about yourself bit done, Nate. Let's get into this cricket discussion.
I talked about myself for 45 minutes. There you go.
Well, it was pretty interesting, pretty riveting stuff. But I chose some topics to talk about
sure.
USA cricket. So let's start with the first one: Major League Cricket and Minor League Cricket, but which are the two main tournaments domestically in the US. And let's talk about Major League Cricket because that happened recently last month. And
yes.
The US joined the T20 Franchise League circuit with Major League Cricket. It was a short tournament. It only went for a few weeks, 13th of July to the 30th. There were only 15 matches in the group stage, with each team playing 5 matches each. There's 6 teams, of course: LA Knight Riders, San Francisco Unicorns, Mumbai Indians, New York, Seattle Orcas, Washington Freedom, Texas Super Kings. And matches were played at 2 venues, in Dallas in Texas and Morrisville in North Carolina.
Yep.
So only 2 venues were used. And as we mentioned, that some of the IPL franchises invested into Major League Cricket with some of the teams. And also in Australia, New South Wales and Cricket Victoria had partnership deals with the Washington Freedom, which was New South Wales, and San Francisco with Victoria.
Yep.
And so that was good. They're helping out and Major League Cricket. And some of the world's best T20 players played. Trent Boult, Rashid Khan, Faf du Plessis, captain the Super Kings. Nicholas Pooran, who played a pretty good innings in the final.
Amazing.
Andre Russell,
yep,
just to name a few.
Yes.
And we saw some of the games were really close, Nate, and others were a bit one-sided, but that's what you get in T20 cricket on the other occasion.
It's true.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And the final was pretty exciting as well, wasn't it? With New York winning in the end by 7 wickets, and Pooran top scoring with 137 not out in the run chase, and they won with basically 4 overs to spare, really.
Yeah.
And the organisers were pretty optimistic. The crowd figures were pretty good. Major League have plans for a 34,000-seater stadium. I was just reading in New York that they want to get up and hopefully be one of the venues for the T20 World Cup next year, but it's just waiting for approval by the ICC for inspection. There's been lots of positive feedback from the players on the tournament. So Nate, what's your assessment on the first season of Major League Cricket, because you were there covering it?
Right.
And do you see any improvements for season 2 and beyond?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, it was very successful. Before the league started, I had one way. It was so successful that I had to change my way of deciding if it was how it was successful. Like going in, I'd settled on a few criteria about how I was going to determine whether it was a success for the first year. And by the end of it, that criteria that I had kind of settled upon was laughably just destroyed. It was it was so far exceeded that it was silly in retrospect that was even my gauge. That's how good it was, and I was expecting it to be good. So it's hard for me to convey just how good it was, but it raised the standards around the US so quickly. I mean, that venue in Dallas alone raised the standard in the US immensely. It's already the best venue in the USA by some distance. Now,
just sorry to interrupt you there. Wasn't it a former baseball stadium? Was it?
it was.
Like,
It used to.
yeah.
It used to be a minor league baseball stadium, and now the interesting thing is here. I don't think a lot of people overseas who don't go to sports events in the USA. I don't think a lot of people will appreciate how good a good minor league baseball stadium is. A good minor league venue is a very nice venue. And so this was a good minor league venue. It actually won some awards when it first opened. A good minor league baseball venue. It won some awards when it first opened. But they basically redid the whole thing. They tore out because you have to. The sight lines are different. Everything's different. It has to be redesigned for cricket, and
it has to be circular, not a diamond. So
right. It has to be the seats have to be oriented to the middle instead of to this extreme end, which they are in baseball. In baseball, all the seats point to the pitcher's mound, and in cricket they have to point to the middle. So they took the whole lower bowl out, and they put new seats in. And this is so important this is why I'm always worried when people say, oh, well, they converted a baseball stadium. Yeah, but they rebuilt a baseball stadium into a cricket stadium. They made, there's a big distinction, and you have to do it this way if you're going to do it. So they rebuilt the stands, and they did a great job. I gotta say, like Peter Della Penna was there beforehand, reporting from there on Twitter, saying that people were still screwing the last, the seats.
I did see that, putting the seats in and the finishing touches.
Yes,
we've got a tight deadline here, so
get
the speed on.
And I'll tell you what, I love minor league baseball, and I love minor league baseball stadiums. And I love baseball. I love sports stadiums in general. And you're probably the same way. So
in the cricket world, yes.
So there's just something about a ballpark. And so I used to go to a lot of minor league games. And I remember there's this league called the Atlantic League, which I really like, which is a unaffiliated minor league. So they don't have any ownership by Major League at all. They're totally independent. And but the quality is really good. They get a lot of major leaguers who they might be 35, 36 years old and sent down into the minor leagues and then released, and then they'll go to this league. So they get good players. But the Atlantic League always was. There was this time in like the late 2000s and early 2010s where their teams, like, it's almost like every year a new stadium opened up. And I would go to all of those, like, as many as I could. Like, sometimes the first game, I was like, I gotta go see this venue. And it was great because I lived in Maryland at the time, and this place, all these venues were Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, within a couple hours drive. So and when I would go to these, sometimes on opening day, the facade on the outside wasn't finished. You would, none of the little touchings, the finishing touches were done. And there were areas that were like roped off, they couldn't fully open the stadium. So I'm used to seeing that. And I thought, this is what I was expecting when I went to Major League. I was expecting, okay, look, it's not the end of the world if the facade's not finished. It's not the end of the world if, all the little fancy touches aren't finished. But honestly, it would look like the place had been done for two months at least. It looked like it had been finished forever. You would have never guessed that they had screwed the last seat in probably 5 minutes before the first person walked in. It was. You would have never guessed it. And when I say it's a good minor league baseball, it's the equivalent of a good minor league baseball venue. That's a massive compliment to a sporting venue. And where it's different, where it blew me away. This is where it really blew me away. Is I was expecting a minor league baseball atmosphere, and which is fun. You go to a minor league baseball atmosphere, it's laid back, it's fun. You sit there and you really go for the conversation. You go for the fellowship with your friends. And this was not that at all. This was, every game felt almost like a playoff game. Like it was every game. The fans were hanging on every ball. They were cheering when something good would happen, for every boundary. They were cheering for every wicket, and they were in the game and they're waving flags. Of course, they gave flags to the fans. But the intensity of the crowd blew away any minor league baseball experience I have had. And it made it feel like a major league baseball experience at a smaller venue in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So it was like that's what it felt like. Almost every game felt like it felt like it was important. And of course, it's a five games per team regular season. Every
Yeah.
game was important, but the buy-in from the fans was tremendous. And that to me was like, I saw that, I was like, this place could add another 3,000, 4,000 seats and they'd have no problem selling out. It felt like it just felt so good to see it work, in person. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was to me the biggest thing. If it's a destination for people, if it's something that people have to go see, then it's hard to replace that. Yes, of course, the television money is where your bread's buttered. And,
Yeah.
But the atmosphere helps create that demand for the television money.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Were there like average American fans, people who were baseball fans that were born and raised in America,
Yes,
that came to the games, were they?
there were. I would say it was at least 85 to 90% South Asian or Caribbean. There were a lot of Trinidadians there. There were a lot of people from Trinidad and Tobago. There were a lot of people, obviously, from Chennai. Super Kings have a massive fan base. So the TSK, the Texas Super Kings team, instantly was the fan favorite. But that was cool to see, because the fact that there's, Grand Prairie itself has it's a smaller town, and it's right next to Dallas. It's right between Dallas and Arlington. So you have Dallas, which is the big city that everyone knows about. You have Arlington, which is where all that big city's teams, professional teams, play in Arlington. That's where their stadiums are. And right in between the two, you have Grand Prairie. So it's a town that definitely wants to put itself on the map. They're proud of them. They're proud. It's Texas, They're
Yeah.
so they, it's important that it's called Grand Prairie Stadium, because the town put their neck out for this place. And so you have to, I was a little unfortunate that on the broadcast they talked about how this was happening in Dallas and how the other leg was happening in Morrisville. They didn't say Raleigh or Durham, which are the two bigger cities that Morrisville's sandwiched in between. They didn't say that. They said Morrisville. So it was a little disappointing that Grand Prairie didn't get its name out there as much as Morrisville did. But Grand Prairie deserves all of the praise for this, not Dallas. So that was an interesting distinction, and it's important to make that distinction. But yes, the Grand Prairie fans, the fans from that area, who weren't familiar with cricket, there were plenty of them there. There weren't a ton, but there were more than I expected, and they were curious, and they had investigated cricket, and some of them had been in it already for a couple of years, but some of them were brand new, and they're like, "Whoa, this is our team. This is our team, the Texas team. I want to come see our team." And they're playing here in Grand Prairie, so I got to go see them. And that's great. That's really cool. And you hope that the franchise can make that connection even deeper. And it's tough to do that in a short season league, but that's the biggest obstacle that I think they'll face.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great to hear that people who are not familiar with cricket liked it, were curious, they wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah.
It's something different, something different, and probably relatable to baseball in some sort of way.
Sure. Yes.
So that's why they made that connections. The improvements, do you see them improving the season, lengthening it? People talked about that. They also talked about some of the names of the teams that they think could be changed. Do you think any changes will be made for season 2 of Major League Cricket?
Yeah, but I don't think it'll be the team names. You're not going to tell the Mumbai Indians what to call their team. They're going to do what they're going to do, right? And each of these franchises had their own strengths and their own weaknesses, as of course they're going to. And it was neat to see that. It was neat to see that playing out. But I think some of the things they'll do is a lot of people were very frustrated that they didn't really address the watching the broadcast. It felt like to a lot of people, and to me too, and this wasn't necessarily the commentator's fault. You could tell it just wasn't. It just that wasn't the mission.
Yeah.
It was as if they were talking to fans in another country about this curious thing that's happening in the USA, instead of
Yes.
we're talking to American sports fans, or we're talking
And
to
try and educate them on cricket.
yeah. There wasn't
Yeah.
any of that. So
Yeah.
and like I said, it's not the commentator's fault. That's not the script that they were given. Basically,
No.
that's not the orders that they were given. So, and most of the viewers, I think 90% of the viewers were abroad. We're not in the USA.
Yeah.
So that's. But you want to get eyes on the sport. You need to get eyes on the sport right away. And so the mission was let's get some of these IPL teams with their brand that exists to come in. They're going to play their brand name players, the players that are associated with their brand. They're going to play them. And you know, everyone else is going to have to work around that on that team, which was a struggle
Yeah.
at first, for those teams. But that was their job. That was the IPL team's job, was to bring eyes. And next year they will absolutely do a better job of trying to bring in new fans and trying to appeal to the new American cricket fans. The next wave of American cricket fans. They're gonna do that. I believe they really will. Now, if they don't, they've really missed the mark. But
Yeah.
I think they will.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can do that. Yeah, from what I saw was pretty promising. It was pretty good. It was just a game of cricket, as you would expect, T20 cricket.
Yeah.
Quality of cricket was good. Okay, it was lacking in some areas a little bit, but that's the whole learning curve for some of these players who are coming through the American system. It's a learning curve for them. Learn with the best players in the world, like a Rashid Khan, like a Trent Bolt, like a Quentin de Kock. How do they go about their batting and bowling?
Right.
So it's a great learning opportunity for everyone. And obviously, whenever you start a new league, you're going to have teething problems. So,
yeah, sure.
So hopefully they can improve it next season. But hopefully.
I think so. Yeah, I think that they will. And there are people in this country who are getting into cricket. Gabe and Nick.
Yeah.
I got to meet Gabe at one of the games, which was cool because we text here and there.
Yeah.
I wanted to meet Nick too, but he couldn't make it. And then of course we got John Boy, who's introducing John Boy Media, who are introducing a lot of Americans to cricket. Look at their video, Cricket Explained for Baseball Fans, and that video has almost 1 million views, and guarantee you 75 to 90% of those are Americans, who probably never heard of cricket or never knew what cricket was, and now they're closer to knowing what it is. And that's humongous. You just get a few thousand Americans into it the first year, then you double that the next year, and you double that, and all of a sudden 4 or 5 years in, and when I say Americans, obviously this can be a controversial thing to say, because surely expats are Americans too, but what I mean by that is non-cricket fans, basically. You get a few thousand the first year or the next year, and then it's going to snowball. And especially if, like I said, that Atlantic League in baseball, they got so much momentum because it was definitely a golden age for them, because every year they seem to be opening a new stadium. And that's what's going to happen in Major League Cricket is, of course, next year we have the World Cup, and if that venue can get built with that humongous temporary venue, which I kind of will believe that when I see it, but if that can get built in New York, all of a sudden now Major League Cricket happens in New York years before it should have, because it takes so long to build a venue in New York. It takes forever, and to find the place to do it is the hardest thing, and to afford it's so expensive. So if they can pull that off next year, huge. And then the next year open a new stadium in the LA area, and then the next year San Francisco opens up, and then the next year Washington opens up. If you can do this, stagger these, it'll actually work out in the benefit of the league quite a bit, because you'll energize each of these cities one at a time. And that will carry them through any early lulls in the league. And once they get to a certain tipping point, it's all automatic.
Absolutely, and those are the benefits. Tourism. People
Yeah.
come in, spend money, good for the economy, in
Yeah.
their town or city
Yeah.
and region. So there's
Yeah.
massive upsides.
Yeah.
To Major League Cricket. So hopefully, I think everyone around the world wishes it to succeed, and hopefully Americans to embrace cricket. So let's talk about minor league cricket, because that's the other comp. That's the one below.
Yes.
Because you have that in American sports, Major League Baseball, minor league baseball. So different divisions, different levels.
Yes.
But minor league cricket, it's back for its third season this year, and it just started, I believe, August the 4th until the 17th of September for regular season.
Yeah, and then the playoffs end the first weekend. Yeah, the first weekend of October is when the playoffs will end. Yes, and those playoffs will be in Dallas at that new venue. Usually, the finals weekend happens here in Morrisville, and we do a great job of getting like the fans here come out in force from final weekend. Yeah,
there's over 150 matches across 7 weeks in the regular season, plus the playoffs for 2 weeks there, and then you have 26 teams nationwide. 17 venues. You're going to have some games at the Grand Prairie Stadium, 19, I think I read on the website. And the competition is the key pathway into Major League Cricket for some of these players. And what I liked is that all the matches are free to attend. You can just rock up and watch a game of cricket, and you can also watch it on the YouTube channel for the streams as well, which is great, accessible for all. So Nate, tell us about more about minor league cricket. What's it about? The teams, the competition, the players, etc. Those who may not know.
Yeah, minor league cricket is kind of my specialty, because I do a weekly show during this minor league cricket season called the Minor League Cricket Show, and I've been doing this. This is my third year doing this, and actually, as soon as we end this meeting, I'll resume my editing of my weekly video. but yes, so that is, there's 4 divisions. So they're basically so first of all, there's 2 conferences. There's the Atlantic Conference, which is on the east side of the country, and then there's the Pacific Conference, which is on the west side of the country. Each of these conferences has 2 divisions. Now the divisions are not they're not like a hierarchy. They're not like different levels. They're the same level. It's just dividing up the nation, because we have such a massive country that so the East is basically the Northeast. It's basically everything north of Washington D.C. In the East, and the South is everything south of Washington D.C. basically in the East. Then there's the Central, which this is an interesting thing. The Central is like that entire column from Texas all the way up to Chicago and Michigan. And then you have the West, which is the entire West Coast. So that goes all the way from Los Angeles all the way up to Seattle. And each of these divisions produces a certain number of playoff teams. I can't remember it's a shame. I can't remember how many there are this year, but typically there's 2 playoff teams from each division that go to the playoffs. This year there'll be more. And typically this is a 10-week league. It's not 7. So this is a shortened version because there was some issues with sanctioning, and USA Cricket it was some difficulties with USA Cricket. Otherwise, we would have had a first half before Major League, and then had Major League, and then I had a second half. But anyhow, differently from minor league baseball, once you get promoted to Major League Baseball from minor league, you don't go back down and play in minor league again unless you do poorly and they send you back down. With Major League and minor league cricket, they don't go. They're not parallel with each other, so they're not running it together. So our minor league cricket is really kind of like our county cricket in a way, but it's for T20.
Yeah.
So, and then our Major League Cricket is kind of like our 100, but it's not the 100 format. But you know what I'm saying? It's our showcase league. So our minor league, all the major leaguers except for one play in minor league cricket. The one that doesn't is Cameron Gannon, who obviously plays in Australia, but he is a domestic based on the fact that he qualifies for USA by birth. So, the other 59 Major League Cricket domestic players play in minor league cricket for their team. And some of the teams have multiple major leaguers on the team, and some of them don't have any. So that's the trick is right now, because we have this constantly changing landscape of cricket in the USA. And right now, the hot place to be is Texas because of this new venue, because of that new venue. And so Dallas is the place to be for Texas right now, the Dallas area, the Dallas suburban area. And so we have 2 Dallas teams. One of them has 8 major league cricketers on it, which is spoils for sure. And especially when you consider this, you have to have 2 U21 players on your team in your playing 11. And you can have 1 overseas. So that can be anybody in the world. So this team in Dallas has 8 major league players, 2 U21 players, and 1 overseas player. And that's like, this team is ridiculously good as you can get. And then you'll have other teams that just don't have any. We have 1 on the team that I do commentary for right now. We have 1. We had 3 last year. But those players, every year there's a lot of movement. It's like it's more movement than the NBA, because these owners don't have a lot of patience. They want to win right away. So they'll offer players more money, and it's just a bidding war to get these players to come and play for their teams. And that's not a bad thing for the players.
Yeah, they have to try and make a living as well.
Yeah.
You play cricket, but you have to have some remediation.
Yes.
Money and contracts and that. So that's understandable.
Yeah.
As every player does in any sport, but in cricket as well, especially if you're playing at that sort of level, domestic level, you need to have some sort of payment there.
Yes.
So that was good to hear about that. Has that attracted many fans as well? Minor league cricket, have you seen big crowds?
It depends on the ownership group for each team. Now, this is one area where most of the teams do very, very poorly, because they don't really care, because they're kind of continuing. It's really hard to change the culture of what existed before. When these guys who are the owners of the teams in minor league cricket are used to a calendar full of weekend tournaments where they pay the best players they can to play in a tournament that's been popped up someplace in hopes that they can get a trophy. And they don't care if anyone comes to these games. This is money that they're just throwing away. But a lot of times, they just like being around good cricketers, and they got a lot of money. But in minor league, we do have a couple of teams that go out of their way to communicate and to make connections with their community. The Philadelphians are the best team at this, and they're named the Philadelphians in homage to the greatest cricket team in the history of America, which was the gentleman of Philadelphia who actually beat Australia at one point in time. So that incredibly good historic American cricket team, which at one time I think was the 4th best team in the world, something like that. It was like the other 3 were international teams, but yeah. So they in homage to that they've named themselves the Philadelphians, and there's a lot of history in Philadelphia, and some of these owners are very knowledgeable about that history, and so that's where Liam Plunkett plays his minor league cricket, and they do a great job of trying to get fans to come out. They need a venue really badly. They need their own venue, and they're working towards that. But I was out there last year. I was very, very happy to be invited to go out up to one of their weekends, and they had over 1,000 fans out there watching a couple of their games. And unfortunately, they lost. But the fans, this was the amazing thing. Okay, so I've said before that in Morrisville, we it's not unusual for us to get 2,000 fans for like a minor league final. That's a big game, right? For a regular season Saturday night game, if we get 1,000, 1,100, that's really, 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 really good. Typically it's going to be about 5 to 800, which is still great. Yeah. But they got 1,000 people out there, and half of them were not the typical faces you're going to see at cricket games in the USA. You know, it was walking around. It was like, how long? I would ask people, and it's really weird to feel like you're stereotyping white people when you're a white person. You know what I mean? But it would be like, if you're at a game here in Philadelphia, right? You're Australian, right? And I come up to you and I'm like, hey, how long have you been into cricket? You might be a little offended by that because I'm assuming you don't know what you're doing, right? And here you are, an Australian in the USA who knows a ton about cricket. And here I am, this goofy redheaded guy that comes up to you and asks you if you've ever heard of cricket before. You know, that might be offensive to you. And so I mean, but I'm still going to go around and ask people their story. And there I was asking people, and some of them were like, "Oh yeah, I heard we had a cricket team, and I just wanted to learn about it. So I watched these videos and Googled it, and then I decided to come." And so yeah, they're the best at it. The Philadelphians, by far, they're the best at it.
Yes, that's pretty interesting to hear. Let's move on and talk about our next topic, Nate, and let's talk about the T20 World Cup, which will be co-hosted with the US next year, and potentially with cricket's inclusion in the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. What sort of an impact will that make? Both of these tournaments will make on cricket in the US. But let's start with the T20 World Cup. It was a strategic sort of decision by the ICC to have the US be co-hosts with the West Indies. Obviously, close together in terms of where they are in the world, but also it was down to expanding the North American market for cricket. That's why they did it. And also to have cricket, the ICC's other ambition was to have cricket in the Olympics, trying to convince the organizing committee for LA 28 to have cricket in the Olympics. This is what could happen. So that's why they decided to bring the US in.
Sure. Makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And then you have the venues at Florida, Morrisville, Dallas, and New York, as we mentioned. They have to be approved by the ICC if they meet up international standards. They're shortlisted as venues. And obviously, it will be a different format in 2024 for the T20 World Cup. There will be 20 teams divided into 4 groups of 5 for the first round. And then with the top 2 teams from each group qualifying for the Super 8s. And then the Super 8 teams will be split into 2 groups, 4 each, with the top 2 in each group reaching the semifinals. So there's going to be more teams playing in the T20 World Cup than it was in Australia last year.
Sure.
And then you have the Olympics, and they're going to be in LA after Paris in 2028.
Yes.
And cricket hasn't been in the Olympics since 1900, and that was in Paris, and Great Britain won the gold medal, and France, which was a mixed team of different nationalities, played for France and won this silver. But cricket has been in the Commonwealth Games. Women's cricket in Birmingham last year, the Australian team just keeps winning everything, the women's team. They won gold. Yeah. And then it was back in 1998 as well for the men's. That was in Kuala Lumpur, which South Africa won the gold medal from Australia, who won silver in the final, and then New Zealand won bronze in that particular tournament. But they weren't classed as one-day internationals. They were List A matches because of the status that they were given at the time.
Yeah.
So it has been tried at major sporting events, games, or whatever, Commonwealth Games. So Nate, what sort of an impact will the T20 World Cup make? And potentially, if the Olympics in LA, if that gets the green light, in terms of promoting cricket in the US, will it have a big impact to play? Will it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how well it goes. I mean, it really depends. It's when they decided to do this, I thought it was too soon. I thought, let's wait till Major League has a couple of years behind it before we start bidding on and winning World Cups. Let's give Major League a couple of years to get a couple more venues out. We just don't have enough venues. That's the biggest thing. And our biggest venue is Florida, which can hold, I think, about 15,000 if you put temporary situation.
And that's the only ground that's hosted major international matches.
Yes,
India are going to be playing there.
Yeah.
in a few days, I think, for their T20 series.
Right. Yes, they are, and the ticket prices for that I think are like 150 or 160 bucks. So it's like Lords on a first day of a test.
Yes. Yeah. You got to make it affordable for people, but
yeah. So I think it can, especially if they can pull off this venue in New York. If they can pull off a big venue, I don't know how they're gonna do it. I really don't. I'm really curious about this, but the venue in Dallas, like I said, it could be temporarily expanded, I believe, to like probably 12,000 seats or more, which would be cool. But that's not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to host India there, and you'll have too many people. People will be trampling themselves to try to get in that place. So you're going to need like at least 30,000 for an India game. So it's.
Well, their games might be in the Caribbean because they've got.
That's probably why. Yeah, that's probably now talking to people who are familiar with both the Caribbean scene and the American scene. I talked to many people who said that the stadium in Dallas is a nicer stadium than anything in the Caribbean. Of course, it's
many
smaller.
of the stadiums are a bit dilapidated. They were upgraded for the World Cup in 2007. That was the 50th of the World Cup.
That was that was 16 years ago. So
they are a little bit run down, a little bit.
Right. So hopefully they get rejuvenated. But if they can build that venue in New York, I think it can be a very, very good thing. That would be amazing. And then obviously, if they do that, then MLC will piggyback off of that and not just use the venue, and that will boost MLC immensely. So I'm cheering for it to work out, but I think it's a massive humongous it's a big task, and I don't know if it'll work or not, but if it does, if we can get it in the Olympics, that would be really, really cool, because I think by 2028 we'll have way more venues. We'll have at least 3-4 more venues, hopefully 6 more venues. But Morrisville is a beautiful place to watch cricket. Church Street Park is a beautiful place to watch cricket. It's the cricket game. The games there are always good games, almost always good games, and the fans are passionate, and it's just an amazing atmosphere. But it's hard to set things up there because it's a public park. So all the infrastructure you bring in is temporary. And you have to do this every time, and it's really a difficult thing to do for the people who do the broadcast. It's very difficult to do it, and
so that's expenses as well. It costs a lot of money for construction and all that stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And there's a city ordinance that the lights have to be off by 10 p.m. So they have to start games at 5 p.m. for that reason. And
with T20 internationals, they do go overtime.
Yeah,
so they do go quite 3 hours. So the overrate's quite poor. So you have to sort of
sort
of playing with that sort of curfew of switching the lights off.
Yeah, we do our minor league games. Our minor league games start at 6, but that's because they can be like, well, look, we're not going to do super overs. But like with major league, you're going to do a super over, so you got to start it at 5. So
and in a T20 World Cup, potentially you could have a situation where you need a super over. It will go later. Also, rain, the weather could play a part as well.
That's right. You want to have the flexibility to start the game later if you have to for any reason. And so that's why Morrisville is a challenge. Now, it's still, I think, it's a charming place to watch cricket. I saw people who came here. I talked to a guy who came here from England, watched all the games in Dallas, then went to Morrisville and watched all the games in Morrisville. And then afterwards he told me, he said, you know what? I think if I had to choose one venue to watch the whole thing at, he was happy there were 2 because of the variety. But he said if he had to choose one, he would have chosen Morrisville because it's more intimate. And but the players, I think, liked Dallas or liked Grand Prairie a little bit more because the lights are better quality. That's a bigger thing. There's a couple of, and also they don't have to get changed in tents. They have a proper changing rooms. So that's a big thing. So I think it could make a big impact. I think it really could make a big impact on the more because it will fill the gap that Major League's leaving. by Major League being even if it doubles the season to 10 games per team for the regular season, that's still way too short for an American sports league. So if you have that happening and you have the World Cup happening in the same summer, that will be really, really good for cricket in the USA, because it'll keep it in the national eye a lot longer. Double it.
It will. And it's a World Cup. So
it's a World Cup.
You're on the world stage, and the USA don't have to qualify because they're already automatic.
We're already in it. We're in. Yes.
So that will give an incentive for people from the US to go watch the team, because you're already in the World Cup.
Yep.
And you just you don't have big expectations on the team, but if they can do well, then it's promising. With the Olympics, imagine, that will because people in the US, the Olympic team of the US is pretty strong for many years, as we know, and especially people in the US will, support any sport they play in the Olympics.
Sure.
So imagine that if the US are in, you get to win a gold medal, that's the incentive. So it's going to be interesting. But the next games after LA will be in Brisbane in Australia. So definitely cricket will get the green light here, I think, because it's in Australia.
I think
but
so.
With the US, it's a bit of a challenge. So it's up to the organising committee, and it's up to the ICC to approve the venues for international standard.
Right.
So we'll have to wait and see on that. But promising, and it will really do wonders for cricket in the US. An associate nation, you don't see many of those hosting a World Cup. It's usually full-member or full-member.
No, you don't.
So they're privileged. They're probably the only team. Well, I say that, but I don't think they'll be the only team, because I think Namibia are going to be co-hosting the next World Cup with South Africa.
That would be really cool. That
2027.
That would be great. Go ahead and put the associate games in a place like Namibia. Go ahead and put the associate games here in the USA, like USA versus Netherlands. Play that one at Church Street Park, something like that. You know what I mean? In the World Cup, and
I think it will come down to how they organise the fixture as well, because cricket boards will have to look at that and broadcasting and say, right, okay, do we want India and Pakistan, for example? Do we want to really play that in the US, or do we want to play it at a stadium in the Caribbean with more capacity, because they bring in big crowds?
Yeah, so, it would. Yeah,
you get all these things.
Lots of considerations.
Lots of considerations to make there. But we shall wait and see on that. Let's talk.
Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed part 1 of our cricket discussion with Nate Hayes from Emerging Cricket. I hope you enjoyed hearing Nate and I discuss his cricketing journey, Major League Cricket and Minor League Cricket, and the ICC T20 World Cup for 2024 and Los Angeles Olympics for 2028, potential impact on cricket in the USA. Stay tuned for part 2 of our cricket discussion with Nate Hayes from Emerging Cricket.